we are back on the Figaro and the new snail has arrived. Look at this lovely thing. So Nuff is busy working on getting it back in there. You looking forward to this job?
Yeah. I'm looking forward to you stop filming so we can actually get on with some work.
Well, indeed. And the reason I've been messing around is the E30 has just arrived back with an MOT, which, as he points out, probably nobody cares. Well, all the people watching this video, which is probably, you know, like 3 people, will care.
Maybe 4.
Maybe 4. All right, after a nice, easy job fitting this in, it's now the middle of the night. Shall we see if it starts? Soph, over to you.
Ready?
Yeah, we won't start because I've pulled the lead out, but it should hopefully turn over all right. It's going to prime the system, so. Okay, that'll do. So that went well. We have a few coolant leaks to deal with. We have a small fuel leak under there, which we think we have now resolved. The coolant leak involves just moving a few pipes and tightening them up. We've got the heat shield back off because there's a lot of smoke coming off, but we've checked it and it's just because we've had our grubby oily hands all over it. But there's a lot of coolant, we think, in the system. So while it has now all cleared, we did fill this with white smoke again, which we think is the excess from when it was running before. Probably filled the cat, saturated it, filled the system, etc. So we're hoping that will run. We have done a compression test. We have checked under the oil cap. There is no signs of a failed head gasket, so we think it is just residual that needs cleaning off. So unfortunately, that's a job for another day. So what Dr. Nuff is doing right here is just shaving down the edge of the oil drain line from the turbo, which didn't quite fit on the new turbo, so just needed profiling slightly with the angle grinder.
A few moments later.
So, I am back in HQ 2.0 and I am still working on Luna the Figaro. We have fitted a new turbo and the problem has not gone away. So, the obvious suspect was the head gasket, but it passed every test for a head gasket. The compression is good, there's no coolant under the oil cap, there is no oil in the coolant. We've done a pressure test on the cooling system and it holds pressure just fine. What the hell is going on? We've got coolant leaking out of the turbo, which is a brand new turbo. We suspected the old turbo had a cracked core because these are water-cooled turbos, as well as having oil for the bearing. So now we're in a situation where we have my hose pipe coming in, going into the turbo, and then a drain pipe coming out of the turbo, so we can see if that's the problem, because we ran the car without the coolant on the turbo and it wasn't leaking any coolant out of the turbo, which means the new turbo might be defunct. But now we want to check. So if we get clean water out instead of coolant, then the core of the new turbo is also bollocksed, which would be very annoying because it's a pain in the arse to fit, and it was not a refurb, it was a brand spanking new turbo at the price is some of about £500. £500. If it's broken, you should be very annoyed. Right, so now we're going to run a turbo on a hose pipe. So the hose pipe is now working. Unfortunately, my hose pipe fittings are a bit dribbly, and it's peeing out in various other places. But do you want to try and turn the engine over and see what happens?
Okay. Ready?
Yeah. Please tell me that's leaking water. Drive the fucking boat. Axe! So you know what the good news or the bad news?
Bad news first.
The bad news is there's a crack somewhere in the intake manifold, and the coolant is going into the intake manifold, through the engine, and shitting its way out of the turbo. Do you want the good news?
Yes, please.
You didn't need to replace your £500 turbo.
But we can refurb the one that we took off.
Yeah, it's true. That's true.
I'll send that to Middle Turbo, get that refurbed, and then that
Thank
can
you.
be sold.
Rightio, it is a cool 30 degrees outside and about twice that inside here, so you can probably tell I'm sitting inside the Figaro. The reason being, I thought it would be good to summarise what on earth has been going on with this car, because we've been sort of dipping in and out of it over various episodes, so I'm going to try and summarise what's happened. So it came in needing a new radiator and cooling system, which was all provided for us. So we fitted a new radiator, fitted some new coolant hoses, struck the car up only for it to be belching out white smoke. So, obvious thing you check is head gasket. So we did a compression test on the car. All came back fine. There was a tiny amount of difference between each cylinders, slightly down on 2 and 3 compared to 1 and 2, but really in the noise. And it's quite a low compression engine as well, so they were relatively good for a low compression. It's 8 to 1, I think, on this. So we thought, well, that's probably not too bad. We had the spark plugs out. Everything seemed to look okay. We did a pressure test on the cooling system, all looked good. Took the oil cap off, no mayonnaise under the oil cap, and we took the coolant cap off, had a look inside there. Obviously we just replaced the coolant, but we'd run the engine a few times. There was no oil residue coming up in the coolant, so all of the immediate tests I could think of to check for the head gasket showed the head gasket was probably okay. Now, the fault was showing us white smoke out of the exhaust, but we were getting liquid coolant coming out between the exhaust manifold and the turbo, and then coming out between the turbo and the catalytic converter, which seemed very unusual. So we wondered whether the previous fault had filled the catalytic converter with water, and maybe that was the problem. So we ran it a little more and it continued to get worse. So we had a look at the engine. The obvious proponent seemed to be the turbo. So it's a water-cooled turbo on this little Figaro, and we've got liquid coolant in the exhaust system post-turbo, post-combustion chamber. So it seemed fairly obvious to us, at least, that that was the source of the problem. We must be getting coolant coming from the core of the turbo into the exhaust side, the turbine side of the turbocharger, and then just sort of leaking through and then boiling off as it's hitting the hot metal of the turbo and the exhaust system. So we whipped the turbo out, we popped a new turbo, brand spanking new turbo on, only for exactly the same problem to occur. Now, that is really quite unusual. So we went round and did all the same tests again, and everything concluded there was nothing wrong with the head gasket. We'd run it a few more times and we thought, well, we would see mayonnaise under the oil cap at this point, or we'd see something in the coolant, but nothing. The coolant system was holding its pressure. Everything seemed fine. We had a continuous leak from one of the fittings on the turbo, but that turned out to be we needed to just file the fitting down. It was touching on the body of the turbo and pushing one of the little fittings away from the body slightly, causing it to drip slowly but surely. So we're getting a bit of smoke out of the bonnet from that dripping, but there was definitely still liquid coolant coming out between the exhaust and the turbo and the catalytic converter. Now at that point we did wonder, well, maybe if the turbo has been belching loads and loads of coolant, we genuinely do have a catalytic converter that's full of water, that's drenched, and that's kind of bubbling back up as it's boiling off and causing it to kind of flash boil and come through the gaps where we got gaskets on the exhaust. So we took the catalytic converter off, so we just had turbo out exposed, as you've seen earlier in the video, and we're still getting coolant belching out of it. So we decided to disconnect the cooling lines going to the turbo just to see whether the turbo is at fault, because there's a very slim chance the new one may have also been faulty of the same issue. So we disconnected all of those coolant hoses, ran the engine up, and it stopped smoking. So for a moment we thought, well, actually, maybe the new turbo's actually got the same fault. Maybe it's cracked and it's pouring coolant into the car, because at the moment it's running clean. So we thought we'd kind of resolved it. We then put fresh water through the turbo to just double check it's the turbo by pushing running water from the tap through. We would see if we're getting clean water out. That's where the source of the water was, and it didn't. So no water came out of the turbo whatsoever. So it's not the turbo. Then we realised that the feed line for the turbo comes in the bottom of the turbo, pushes the coolant through the turbo, and it goes out, and then it goes off into the intake manifold. So that's interesting. So by disconnecting the turbo, we disconnected the intake manifold. So we buttoned everything back up except the intake manifold. We bypassed the intake manifold, so it sealed all the system back up, ran it up, and we were getting coolant coming out of the turbo again. So, okay, so our solution was then it must be the intake. Maybe the intake is an aluminium casting with coolant running through it to help with cold starting, I think. Maybe that's the problem. So we capped that off again, buttoned everything else up, and we're still getting coolant coming out of the turbo. So when we disconnected the turbo, we'd opened the cooling system, we ran it out unsealed, and that's the only time it stopped. So we had a bit of a realization. Actually, the one thing we hadn't done was run the whole system buttoned up with both the turbo and the intake manifold unhooked until that point. And so when the system was all buttoned up, it was building up pressure. And once there's pressure in the cooling system, it was still getting in somewhere. And it can't have been on the intake and it can't be the turbo, which eventually means despite all other tests suggesting the head gasket was good, it wasn't. So with the head gasket firmly in our sights, after skirting around it for ages because we were convinced it's not the head gasket, even though it kind of feels like it should be the head gasket, we couldn't provide any solid evidence to risk taking the cylinder head off, only to find that wasn't the problem. But now we were sort of fairly sure. At this point, nothing was certain. We were about 80% sure at this point. Somebody suggested doing a leak down test. So we did a bit of a leak down test on the cylinder, and we went in at cylinder 1, and we could just about hear a small amount of bubbling coming out of the radiator. So the system was holding relatively good pressure, but with high pressure on the cylinder side, it was obviously bleeding into the cooling system. So it's bleeding compression gas from the cylinder on cylinder 1 into the cooling system, and then I guess on the intake stroke where there's negative pressure, it's then drawing coolant back out of the system. But at static, it's more or less sealed. So it's a really, really tiny weep of a failure, but enough to cause quite a lot of a cloud of white smoke. So despite all the tests suggesting it's not the head gasket, we are now 90 to 95% sure it is the head gasket. And I don't have the equipment for skimming the head. I also don't have the time to be pulling it all apart and doing the head again. So we have a chap called Alex Hopwood at Hopwood Motorsports just outside the village. He is going to take the job on. He's going to get the head off, have it skimmed, check it all, pressure test it, find out if it's a crack in the head or a dead head gasket, and also check the intake manifold, because I'm still not 100% sure it isn't the intake manifold causing a bit of a problem, and then reassemble it all and then put it back on the road for Soph, who we are doing this work for. So a long story, there's 7 odd minutes worth of explaining it because it was complicated, and every time we tested it we were convinced it was something else because it just wasn't doing the usual head gasket failure stuff. But as a result of doing all of the running around the engine, it has now got a new turbo. The old turbo is therefore probably not bad, so that can be refurbished. Some money can be regained there. It has, as originally planned, got a new cooling system. So it's got a new radiator, new fan switch, new cooling hoses. In taking it all apart, we also noticed there were some fuel hoses that were bad, so we've replaced some fuel hoses. So that's one nice thing we've managed to achieve. And the brakes definitely needed some looking at, as I mentioned in the earlier bit of the video, or might have been the previous video at this point. It needed the slave cylinders doing on both the back wheels, so that has been done. We now have really good, solid, firm brake pressure on the pedal. So we've done pretty much everything else, and it's over to Alex to do the last bit, which is get the head off, get that head gasket done, and get it repaired and back on the road. And then Soph can hopefully have the car back before we finish this incredible heat wave and actually drive with the roof off and enjoy her little Figaro. Right, that's all for this episode of Automotive Tales. I know it's been a sort of long walk around and a sort of drib-drab through all the different things that have been going on, but it's that time of year where there's lots of little things and no big projects that we can do sort of full videos on. I have got a stack of videos coming on a day out we had a little while ago, playing with some Land Rovers and some Range Rovers off-road. I'm still waiting for JLR to their PR team to approve the videos. So they were going to start going out on the 11th. It's probably going to be the tail end of July now before those go out. And in the meantime, we're going off to Spa to go and watch the F1. So we've just had Silverstone. The next race is going to be Spa. So I will bring you some videos of going and exploring the Spa. And I'm going off with Mrs. Automotive Tales rather than my usual rabble of motorsport friends. So it might be toned down slightly, but will, still be a fun, well, it's going to be Spa weekend with the wife, except the Spa in question is Spa-Francorchamps. Right, anyway, that's all from me. I am sweating like crazy in this car. It must be 40 odd degrees in here. And I'll see you next time on Automotive Tales. Bye for now. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Thank you for watching. So, the Beetle did go back into our workshop for a few bits and pieces, which I didn't cover on the channel because I didn't have time to get the camera out. It needed new bushers on the rear axle, which was a heck of a job. Indeed. The Dr. Nuff did for Joe, the owner of this Beetle. But while it was there and while he wasn't around, we may have added some plastic harmonicas to the underside of the car. Just passing on the joy of the little trick that was done to us on the Rolls Royce a few years ago at Le Mans. So I wonder how long it takes him to notice the extra little whistles coming out from underneath the car.